topic given to me was the future of higher education in building a resilient India. I was just reading up for my panel yesterday night and read that resilient meant strong enough to deal with change. It reminded me of a book that I recently finished. It is Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And anti-fragile, he says a very good concept. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So resilience is, so if we don't completely mess up with your education system, we're only going to go better with time and age. And I'm very happy to have a very august panel this morning with me today in Goa. On my right is Professor Vidya Yeravdekar. And I think all great things are built upon sacrifices. Her mother sacrificed her PhD long years ago so that symbiosis could be what it is. That is something. And as I was reading, I also found out that in the initial days of symbiosis, that this family has hosted many students, foreign students. One of them, a student called John Owens, also stayed in your house, and you later got her married to a Maharashtrian girl, and now he stays in the United States of America. There are many such students which they have hosted at their home when Symbiosis was a gang institute, but now it is a colossus. So there is a commencement speech of Steve Jobs at the Stanford University where he says that in your life you can connect the dots only going backwards. So wherever you reach today, you will have to see what all you have done earlier and you reach. So you can never connect the dots going forward. You have to connect the dots going backwards. I was also reading about another co-panelist of mine, Professor Bhushan Patwardhan, and of course his work in Ayurveda and all the lectures in all the universities over the world. And also, I mean, he's held so many positions that I filled half a page only. It will be a long read of what he's done. But of course, you are all academics, you know what he's done. I would especially like to talk about Professor Rajkumar. I think sometimes in decades, nothing much happens, and sometimes in a few years a lot changes. So what is this? In the Jindal Global University, I've seen transformation, and many of you may not know, I met Professor Kumar before he set up this university. And he told me, Tarun, you will have no idea what we are going to create. This was in 2008. I think your first batch rolled out after that. And I think single-handedly somebody who's transformed education in India, making it world-class. I know a lot of foreign Indian students who, instead of going abroad for education, choose JGU as the consistent option in North India. And that is something we must credit Professor Rajkumar for creating. His academic achievements aside, I think what he's created in JGU is an inspiration to many of us. And I am indeed very happy to be having him on the panel. And what he did with the law school, I think, because this is such an audience, I don't need to tell what he's done with this law school. So, and of course, Ben, I'll get to know more about because we're meeting for the first time. So, at the outset, I will request Professor Bhushan Patwardhan to open the discussion with his opening comments. We'll take a round of opening comments and then we go to the specific questions. Over to you.
Thank you. First of all, let me tell you, today is 21st of February and UNESCO declared this day as International Day for Mother Language. And I'll start from there. Today we are in the Amrut Kal, what we call it as 75th year, Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. And in education, I feel that the inclusion will happen when mother tongue education is strengthened. So the Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-resilient, self-reliant India. But that is possible when we regain our Atma Sanman, our own identity. And that can come only through education. So education, I think, has a lot to do. As we progress, I will add on more. Thank you.
Now we go to Professor Vidya Yeravdekar from Symbiosis for your opening comment today.
Yeah, thank you, Tarun. I think we as academicians are really living in exciting times, and so are our students. When we talk about the future of education, I think the past of what we've done in education is equally important. Otherwise, we wouldn't have produced several unicorns and CEOs of some top companies. And I think therefore we, as you very rightly said, in fact, I was going to quote this, that, connecting the dots backwards is as important as looking ahead. And I think that's what we, each one of us needs to do. Another great idea that came up yesterday in my panel discussion, I think Dawn or Ling, one of them mentioned that, you should not move away from your core. So in this era of competitiveness or competition amongst, industries, amongst higher education institutions, I think each one of us need to also maintain its own DNA, because that's your identity. Otherwise, you're just all over the place doing so many things. So I think that is equally important, and I think Raj has done it so well. Dr. Muzumdar, my father, who founded Symbiosis, has done it so well to create an identity for Symbiosis, likewise, and create an identity for OP Jindal. So I think while we do so many other things, when we look at the future ahead of us, I think each university has to decide its own identity, because, that is something that will stay with each one of us.
Thank you. I'll go to Professor Rajkumar. You must tell us in your first answer, how do you create a world-class university in just 9 years, 10 years? Is there some formula that when you came from Hong Kong, you were all of 37 years old.
34.
34. You are under 50, and you've already created what is regarded as at one of the best universities, and it's discussed everywhere. I mean, you had it all up in your mind when you came to India. How did this happen?
Thank you so much, Tarun, and of course, I'm very conscious of the fact that nothing actually ends up possible to happen without a collective consciousness and learning and experiences and inspiration that you acquire. So to answer your question, frankly, there is a very rich legacy of Indian institutions, not only aspiring to, but also achieving that. I mean, I can trace back to what Vikram Sarabhai and Homi Bhabha did at the turn of the century, returning from Cambridge. C.V. Raman had already got the Nobel Prize, and they were laying the foundations for the Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru. And there are so many other experiences in India, all of which shaped my thinking. But my thought process that really shaped me was my education both at Oxford and Harvard. In 1998, I was a student at Oxford, and later in 2000 at Harvard. And both those experiences really enabled me to think that why can't we have world-class institutions such as the ones that I was there, both in terms of teaching, research, and inspiration that I gathered as a student. In some ways that challenged my own ideas of education, because I did go to two good Indian universities, University of Delhi, which is 100 years old, and Loyola College Madras, which is another nearly 100 years old institution. But what challenged me was their emphasis on research, their stronger emphasis on knowledge creation, and their, absolute commitment to quality and excellence, unwavering commitment to quality and excellence, and their deep commitment to internationalization, all of which I felt was something that India was pretty much ready to absorb and endorse. And that triggered a thought process. And last bit was about the unique American idea of not-for-profit, private, philanthropic institutions. As you can imagine, the Humboldtian model of research university, which grew from Germany to across the world, the state was the driver of that, including great British and European institutions. But what America did was to develop an entire private sector imagination with philanthropy, which changed the dynamics of higher education there.
Good you brought up philanthropy, because going back to 2014, when on one such panel I interviewed Nitin Nahoria, who was then the Dean of Harvard Business School. And he told me that he recently had concluded a donation exercise where he raised 250 crores in Indian rupees from the Tata Group in those days. And he told me that I don't see that kind of money. The last example I know is what happened when one of the co-founders of Indigo, he put money in his alma mater. He gave about 100 crores, if I'm not wrong. But there are not many such examples. When you said philanthropy, I think we are doing less of that as with regards to education institutes. It's another thing when industrialists and promoters start, but otherwise common people, businessmen donating is not such a movement in India. And maybe later you can reflect on that. We'll go to Ben, because our topic is the future of higher education and building a resilient India. When you look at the Indian landscape, what do you see currently and what potential do you see? Given the demography that India has, the population and the young population in the subset of what we have.
So perhaps I can share a story.
Yes.
My grandfather, he was a great storyteller, great theorist, and he loved wine. And he used to theorize as he saw the emergence of New World wines arrive in the UK, that there was an interesting change in the wind, that in France they had all the perfect conditions. They had the best grapes, and as a result, for centuries, they'd made very good wines. In Australia and Chile and Argentina, they didn't have the perfect conditions or the best grapes, and so they'd had to innovate. They'd had to change their processes. They'd had to look at every step of the process and come up with new ways of doing things in order to make good wines. What if, he used to say, what if you could bring all of those processes and all of those innovations to bear in France with the best ingredients? However, what did the winemakers in France say about that? They were skeptical. They had their traditions. They didn't want to change. They didn't want to change. They wanted to carry on doing things the way they'd done for centuries. And I think that's an interesting story, an interesting parallel here in India, that for many years since I first came here, I'm only just now beginning to see shift. There are all the right ingredients here in India. I think in many ways, the national education policy is a great recipe for new wine. The question is, can India bring together all of the best ingredients and the best innovations in the same place to really build for a bright future?
Very beautifully put. I'll take this now to Mr. Patwardhan. I was also reading about the Germany's dual system of education. In India, since time immemorial, we had a system where academicians taught and industry employed. So there was a disconnect between the two. And many times when I spoke to promoters, they used to say we spend them on retraining them once they have done their education. And it costs us a lot of money. And many times when the IT companies started employing graduates other than engineers for their work, I asked them, why do you do that? He says, any which ways we have to train. So we'll take a graduate in any discipline and train him in what we want. We have seen that phase in India. Do you think the future lies in industry-academia partnership where they actually set up or they co-develop courses with the academia, and then that helps employability of students in a country like India where there is an employability issue?
Certainly, a very good question. Actually, employability is certainly important, and industry-academia linkage all of us have been talking about. Many universities have actually started doing it more aggressively. But in the changing world, employability is not a frozen thing, you know. Employability, the scenario keeps on changing so much, so the moment you train somebody for something, that may get outdated, you know. So basically, purpose of education is not only giving employment, you know. Purpose of education is to create some abilities in that individual, bringing out whatever is there in that individual in the best possible manner. No, and the objective education actually is well-being, you know, well-being of the individual, well-being of the society, and this purpose of education, I think we must not forget. You know, in the over-enthusiasm of creating skilled, ready to work in industry, because industry anyway will have to train them on the floor. So new models will emerge, you know, wherein industry and universities together will do something. And universities' focus should be on something like, say, educatedness, and creating an individual with high-order cognitive capabilities, you know, critical thinking. This is what the National Education Policy 2020 is talking about. So you are not creating somebody for a X job, but the jobs which will also come in X plus 1, X plus 2, X plus 3. And that's what our education system should do. Thank you.
So basically the difference between literacy and education is critical thinking and research skills. That is what it constitutes. I'll take the question to Professor Vidya Yeravdekar. Now, we were discussing before we started the panel, the Germany's education model, where I think there's the lowest, in a sense, unemployment rate for youths. They all have jobs. What is there to learn from that model, and what are you doing at Symbiosis which you feel is in a sense making a change? You have some tie-up with some industries. Have they set up on your campus? What all, if you could share that with us.
Yeah, so I agree with Dr. Bhushan completely that, you know, skilling has been so overemphasized, and for the right reason. But one must not forget that there were in the past also ITIs, training centers that would skill people. But what you want is that because of the uncertainty of jobs, and we all know we are preparing our students, we also don't know for exactly what jobs. And therefore, I think the educatedness that he calls, or I call it citizenship, it's about creating a holistic individual with a good character, a good personality, excellent communication skills, and obviously find someone who can find solutions to worldwide problems. It is difficult, but all of us are trying to do that. And I think in India, it has come up recently through the national education policy, a liberal education where, it's not just in silos of engineering or other disciplines, but giving them, the students, a holistic view. This is one. The second is all of us. I mean, I'm sure almost every university representative sitting here would be doing the same thing, having industry people on board of studies, academic council, they looking at your curriculum. So we are quite industry aligned, and our other relationship with the industry is obviously placements. But I would just quote two examples where what we have done is Infosys is just setting up a maker's lab on the Symbiosis International University campus. And that's to build the entrepreneurial spirit, so that to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I'm sure all of us are moving from employment ready individuals to individuals who can give employment to others, right? So this is one partnership I can quote, and it's a beautiful partnership that we will have. In fact, we have Mr. Narayan Murthy on our campus the day after tomorrow. The other example is with Serum Institute. Now, imagine everybody was talking about Serum, obviously in the pandemic, having provided the Covishield vaccine, which all of us have taken jabs of. Now, they went to Oxford, and Oxford was their knowledge partner, and they did the manufacturing. Then Serum came to us, and now we are setting up a big lab to do research in biologicals and vaccines. So it's not just about vaccines, but even other molecules which the pharmaceutical industry would be interested in. So apart from Tarun, just these kind of partnerships for employment, now you see, I'm sure many universities have more examples than what I can quote. Our research, entrepreneurship, those kind of partnerships also happening because industry also knows that they need to connect. Otherwise, it was only a one-way traffic. Now it's both ways.
One good thing is that if Symbiosis does it, 10 other Indian universities get inspired to do it because you follow the leader.
I don't know whether we are the leaders, but I can see good examples happening elsewhere as well.
I'll now take my question to Professor Rajkumar. I was reading yesterday for this panel and I realized the US is about a $22-23 trillion economy. They spend 6.1% of their GDP on education. UK is 5.5%. It is also a little bit larger economy than India with much lesser population. Australia also spends 5% of GDP on education. India does only 4.5%. So we are about more than 1% less, and despite having an economy size of about $3 trillion. What do you make of this, and what is the potential, and do you think policy making needs to reflect on this?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Tarun. I think if I am right, the Indian GDP investment on higher education is even lesser than 4%. In fact, one of the things that the national education policy did was to make a commitment towards having over 6% investment in GDP, but also to create a national research ecosystem as well. I must confess that unfortunately and historically, education has not been a policy priority for governments, regardless of whichever party that has been power. We have always had in fact, the data of the expansion of private higher education in India from its very modest origins to today, over 70% of institutions in private sector and over 70% of students studying in private higher education institutions, including those colleges, it clearly shows that the state has abdicated its responsibility when it comes to investing in higher education. While I am in favor of privatization of higher education, I should also mention that state has to play a very significant role, continue to recognize that. Talking about the expanding role of the economic aspects, it is unfortunately not yet recognized the potential of higher education. Australia is a very good example. After mining, international education is the second largest contributor to the Australian economy. Second largest contributor to GDP in Australia in higher education. So in some ways, our ability to not only build institutions, but also to be able to cater to what I have elsewhere called as frugal innovation, whereby affordable, high quality education is possible for a large number of students from, but especially from Africa, South Asia, many parts of Southeast Asia, a potential that has been completely untapped. In fact, I have been generally critical of this idea of opening up foreign university campuses in India, because I believe that that bus has long gone. What we should focus on is to build capacity within Indian institutions and promote strong and substantive international collaborative partnerships for the foreign universities in India, and to enable Indian institutions come out of the kind of regulatory regime that they are mostly struggling, both public and private, so that ultimately we can become a destination for higher education. The pluralistic nature of our democracy, the commitment to the rule of law, a deep and abiding commitment to diversity, a long and history and tradition of higher education, all of which makes us a viable destination for higher education.
In fact, when you hear Professor Rajkumar, I can almost sense the passion with which he speaks on this subject. This completely drives him, we can sense, because I interview for a living, so I see how, with what convictions. So let me ask you one more question on this. We have builders in the Rajya Sabha. We have sugar industry owners in Rajya Sabha. We have people who make pharma medicines in Rajya Sabha. We don't have educationists in Rajya Sabha. How many of them? Fairly good. That's a joke that Vidya is making, but any which ways.
So Rajya Sabha is the upper house of the Indian Parliament. Well, absolutely, you are right. I think the fact, one of the things I've always lamented in the Indian context is that we have not given sufficient importance to the intellectual project. A similar question that I have always maintained is that the most important portfolio within the government ought to be education. But we all know that that's not the case. Many a time it is not uncommon for people to believe that the good portfolios are commerce and finance and defense and so many others, excepting education, while education will determine the future of our society. So no doubt about the fact that we need to bring that intellectual traditions back into our society, where the so-called guru, the teacher, the institution, the knowledge becomes paramount for the future of our society.
Point well taken, and very relevant also, because how can India, this debate on GDP of education be stirred unless there are educationists in parliament taking up these issues? Because for every industry there is a representative. Educationists should be there, 5-7 of them in Rajya Sabha to take it up. I'll go to Ben for this question. When you said that India can become that place where all of this can converge, do you think that can happen without India GDP per GDP, percentage of GDP spends going up in education? Because the state itself should focus on education for education to be successful and India to become a hub of anything.
It's very difficult to create transformation without being prepared to spend what it costs. But I do think that the more fundamental inertia is around mindset shift. Your question about industry engagement, for instance, that I'd like to come back on, because I think it speaks well in this context. Approximately half of our children will do, maybe more, will do jobs that don't exist today. It's a common misconception that employers just want skills. Of course they want skills. Everybody wants skills. Of course they do. But really, our employer research, and by the way, we conduct the world's largest survey of employers around the world, so we know a little bit about this. Our employer research suggests that actually much more what they're looking for is character, resilience, adaptability, integrity. And they're telling us universities aren't conferring those things either. So much as we can sit here and say, well, yeah, it's not all about the latest skill, you're right, it's not all about the latest skill, but all of those other things that universities aspire to deliver and confer on their young people, they're not happening widely enough either. And that's creating a problem down the track where much as the skills of the future are not known yet. Well, if that adaptability and resilience is there, then the young people are coming out prepared to shift and change. And of course there are exceptions. There are brilliant people. There are iconic stories of young people coming out of fantastic universities and doing amazing things. But in the round, the dissatisfaction that we're hearing from employers is less about the individual skills, although that's important, and more about the future ability to develop the skills that we don't yet know we need.
That's a fairly important point, but the answer to that is not also easy, because we don't know what we need, and I think it needs a lot more partnership with the industry, because they at least have some idea what's going to happen because they are in it. I'll go to Professor Bhushan Patwar then. I'll ask you the same question about GDP on education and about educationists and academicians in parliament. Any view on that? Because we're talking of building a future for strong, resilient India in the education sector, and in a country whose demography is well known. We have the largest number of youngsters in this country today.
Yeah, no, I agree completely what Raj said, and actually we need to give glamour to education. Today teachers are not getting that kind of a glamour what Bollywood actresses or actors might get, But for that purpose, teachers also need to transform, Teachers are no more there now to just give information. Their role is, and we must look at, for resilient India, I feel that we must look at Industry 5.0. Not just 4.0, which is more collaborative, which is more personal, which is more interactive, and not only robots but cobots, means collaborative learning is going to be the future. So all this, to tell you, means traditionally in India, science, philosophy and spirituality traveled together, Later on these distributions came in, and for some reason we have a great glamour for STEM. I am from STEM, so I know STEM is very important, but STEM is not everything, We in a process, means you will find that huge investments are going in the area of STEM, so new IITs, new IIMs, which is good, but not a single National Institute for Humanities. Now, where are we heading? Are we creating a new generation, right brain shrinked, which will be very dangerous for the society, and also we will be not ready for Industry 5.0. So we have to bring this balance, and liberal education, which new education policy has talked about, has to be brought actually in spirit, not only by cosmetic purposes. So with these changes, I think, can happen rightly when you are saying, when the right voices are there at the lawmaking bodies, including the parliament and at the state legislative assemblies. I hope that education will get that kind of a predominance and prominence in the whole policy making and governance system of the country.
Very, very important point said. I'll take the same question to Professor Vidya Yeravdekar on this. Educationists in parliament taking up issues of education because that is what they know, that is what they'll take up in parliament. It will influence policy making because they will speak this in parliament. And secondly, our GDP spend on education, and your 2 bits on that.
Yeah, so I think it's a myth. What you're saying, I wouldn't agree to that, because not necessarily doctors in the parliament take up issues related to medicine and health, and nor would any other professional people would take up the issues concerning them. I think they take issues that concerns their constituencies or in Rajya Sabha because someone has fed them with certain knowledge. I think it's not about your presence in the parliament, it's about advocacy, through various networks, through various bodies, through forums like these. And of course, as most of my panelists have spoken about, that can we give that importance to education in a way that it really requires. And when that happens, I think, these whole issues of whether you need to be in the parliament as a member or you can remain outside the parliament and advocate it better, we will see the change. I think all of us need to collaborate and push. I think there are a couple of us like Raj and me who are always on some webinars, pushing things, saying things that probably maybe regulators don't like us to say, and so. But there should be a whole, a whole conglomeration of people who will come together and say, no, this is not what we want in education. Let's advocate something else. There are bodies like FICCI and many others who do this. But we don't see that kind of, togetherness, the way you would see if something goes wrong with the corporate law, you can see how top industrialists would come together and go and meet the Prime Minister. How many of us would even get an appointment, right? Because we are not come together. I can't get an appointment individually alone. Or Raj can't get it alone. Maybe he can, but through his network. But I'm sure if some of us who are the lesser mortals may not also get. And if that happens, then, you're not going to advocate what you really want to do. So I think it's all about, again, coming back to Dr. Patwardhan, it's about collaboration for advocacy. It's about collaboration for our, for our students, for our faculty, etc. So,
But because you made the point about doctor, I'll tell you how it matters. Jyoti Midha was a member of parliament. She was a doctor. She had the greatest impact on the drug price control order, which is in the Department of Pharmaceuticals in the Government of India, where certain drugs were priced higher. She got all them to be priced lower. So if you have domain knowledge, you can impact.
yeah, but that would be, I'm a medical doctor myself,
Yes.
so I can tell you with great conviction that I'm sure someone fed her with that knowledge so well that she could take this up. I think it's all about feeding with the right knowledge to any member of parliament who can take it up for you.
Okay, point well taken. When Professor Patwardhan was speaking about rock stars as educationists, I remember I was sitting in a coffee shop in Delhi, and there was a lady sitting next to me. We got chatting, and I asked her where she was from. She was, I think, from France. She said, I am a professor at Jindal Global University. So I said, do they have professors from abroad? They say, many. We stay on campus. We come to Delhi on weekends. So then I realized that you had so many people, and of course you must be paying world-class salaries, because you can't get world-class professors, rockstar professors, unless you pay them well. What do you have to say on that aspect as well?
Well, I just want to add one point about what I think Dr. Abdekar said. It is only fair to say that the larger context of public consciousness might potentially develop if more and more academics are somewhat represented in any decision-making body, including parliament, or for that matter in the cabinet and other things. Listen, world-class academics are not confined to any particular nationality. They could be from any Indian institution, they could be Indians, or from anywhere in the world. We have a very strong 1,000 plus faculty members who are from 49 countries in the world, and these are full-time faculty. So we do recruit faculty members from around the world, but regardless of their nationality, be it Indian or international, our endeavor, like other good institutions' endeavor, would be to attract some of the finest minds. In fact, one of the unfortunate tragedies of the larger imagination of Indian higher education system has been we have not paid enough attention to the most important constituency in a university, which is the faculty. But I will give a causal effect of that, or rather the cause of it, Tarun. Since I moved to India in the year 2008, I have given over 13,000 talks across the country. I mostly talk to school students, and I go and interact directly with them across India. And at the end of these talks, I ask a question, be it in IIT or in IIM or in Wellam Boys School or in any school. I ask a question, how many of you would like to become a teacher, a professor, an academic? I am sad to say, and this is not a scientific study I am quoting, it is personal anecdotal experience. Regardless of my talk in Kanyakumari or Nagaland, the answer is less than 1% of students in the class are raising their hand. We have a very unfortunate system whereby while we are attracting some of the finest minds to enter into education and expand in the sector, unfortunately, we are being taught and serviced by relatively mediocre individuals who probably have not been successful in many other or arguably any other career and have come into education. There are obviously notable exceptions, but that still remains a very marginalized and in the margins. This aspect needs to be given a very strong attention because it has a direct correlation to the project on education and our ability to build research institutions.
Professor Vidya Veeratkar
just
wants
to expand to the same answer that he has given. Now I think that these things might change with the professor of practice. The UGC has rolled out this designation to people from the industry. Otherwise, they used to come and teach in all our schools, but they didn't have a kind of designation other than a visiting faculty or a guest faculty, which wasn't really great. So for senior people, this is wonderful. But I don't know whether Professor Ling is here from NTU, and yesterday also I said how I follow NTU. there the School of Education produces people, young individuals who take education as a career by choice, and they are more excited because I think when they pass out, they immediately get jobs and good salaried jobs with great respect. I think we also need to create, how many of us have really faculty of education? Other than, I think Raj has one, and we are planning to set up one. We have something on internationalization of higher education. But again, why? Because self-finance institutions know and always depend on revenues that come from students, and we know how many students are really going to join this profession. So I think we need to reflect on ourselves also to say that why can't we make this profession something that, young individuals will aspire for.
Point well taken. I'll take this to Ben at this point. 2005 or 6, I read an article about how a gentleman who worked, an Indian who worked in United States of America for many years, came back, joined the IIT as a professor, a thing which he called as a sacrifice. I came here because I've made my money, I'll give back to my institution. From sacrifice to being highly paid, do you think India needs to make that transition when professors are paid much, much better salaries than what they are paid today? That's when we become what we, in a sense, what we aspire to be in the education sector.
I think that would definitely help. And again, you've got to find the money to be able to do that. And the change doesn't happen overnight. People have got to see the sector in a different way. There've got to be more Bollywood stars in higher education. We need more Amitabh of higher education here on my left. But it's all about inertia and overcoming that inertia. Now, we can say with experience that the reason why you're not getting an appointment with the Prime Minister is not because he doesn't want to change things. Our founder and president had 2 hours with PM Modi in November 2021. A fascinating conversation, wide-ranging understanding of what needs to happen in the sector. Your Prime Minister is one of the people who is trying to push that boulder. He's trying to get it moving. He's trying to get it started. We have some other people here on the stage, I think, that are trying to do the same thing. The challenge to everybody else in higher education in India is, do you want to be the boulder or do you want to be the change? And we need to get more people pushing and less people holding it back.
Point well.
And on the money part, since you talk about money bit, I should tell you that I must say, Tarun, that nowhere in the world people are attracted to academia because it pays the highest. That's not even the case, and that's not the kind of mindset academia attracts, and I would argue that that's not the people anyways we want in academia. I strongly believe that academia should provide enough financial incentives so that it becomes an attractive career choice, and people should not be sacrificing. I don't like that word at all, and that's not a right thing for that person to have said it. But having said that, I cannot help but quote this amazing book by the name Michael Sandel, who's a Harvard-based political and moral philosopher, in his book titled What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets, in which he argued that we need to make a distinction between a market economy and a market society. A market economy is one where everything that we do is measured in monetary terms. And in the consequence of a market economy is institutionalized forms of corruption and institutionalized forms of inequalities. We don't want that. We believe in the market, and that's why the market society is important, which is different. My point is, we ought to have some things that money can't buy. And I continue to believe that education ought to be something where what ought to be paramount is the advancement of public service and the promotion of public good. If these two things don't define education, we will end up becoming like any other corporation or company or business enterprise, and we will end up not able to distinguish the core of what an educational institution ought to be.
Point very well taken. I'll give one example to all the viewers here. There's a professor in Harvard Business School. He helped draft an idea for a food startup in India, which is related to serving tea. I'm forgetting the name. These people came to India, they've started that chain, they have got hundreds of outlets in India, and the professor has got 10% sweat equity in the project because he helped conceive it. He's still a professor in Harvard Business School. He's an Indian professor who teaches at Harvard. He has sweat equity, so he gets a share of profits while he has nothing to do with that project in India. So that's the power of a professor. He helped incubate an idea. It was implemented in India, a country where he never comes. Of course, he's an Indian, but of course, he's teaching there. He gets money from India. This is what is, I just learned recently that I'll be able to give you the name and the other details outside of the panel. So I'll take this to Professor Bhushan Patwardhan. Things change. Professors can also become architects of businesses which they help design and then are implemented in society.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. What Raj, you said, teachers must emerge as a role model. How many of us can actually claim to be that? That's the question teachers should ask. I think teachers coming only because there is a good package, then there is no difference between the business house and a university. While that is also important. I also think that teachers should actually forget about their monopoly of teaching. Teachers have started thinking that teaching is their monopoly. But teaching happens everywhere, Teachers start teaching, learning, it's about learning. So we should facilitate that learning. There is a phrase, among the students, very popular. They say that death by PowerPoint. The way in which, not maybe in future there will be death by ChatGPT also. So, but essentially, it's a mission. Teaching is a mission, and traditionally, especially in India, and when we are talking about resilient India, this is very important because it has been like that. It has been like that all through, like what you talked about Gurukul. And role model, I can give you my own example. Ms. Vidya's father, actually. Because of him, I could get insights through internationalization. First time, he taught me in Ferguson College in Pune. He was a professor of botany, Professor Mujumdar, And since then, that internationalization was spinning in my mind, brewing in my mind. So how a small change which is brought at that particular level can make a big change. And this is the responsibility of teacher, So I think in the transformational phase to go to resilient India, teachers will have to own up this, and teachers will have to change and not expect students really to follow what they are telling them to follow, because I continue to learn from my own students even today. We undermine capabilities of students in our own system.
Point well taken, because you brought up Professor Mujumdar's name. In fact, one of my first interviews with Ram Jethmalani was in his office in the old Symbiosis campus. And he knew my interest in law, and he says, come on, Jethmalani is, I think, chairman, professor emeritus, and he's coming, so why don't you come along? And I interviewed him in his office, and we were chatting, we had a cup of tea, and this is I think 15, 16 years ago. He used to be a regular visitor to your campus, and once I was there. But I'll take this question to Professor Vidya Veravdekar. Abe, the first question which we'll also take up is AI in law, AI in education. Is a completely new concept to me also. I don't understand, but of course you are in the heart of things. Could you share something on that area and what Symbiosis is doing on that?
So I'm also no expert in technology. As I said, I'm a medical doctor and now into education. But yes, there are people in Symbiosis and even outside who keep talking to us about and giving us presentations on AI in education. And when they give us a presentation, it's like mind-boggling, it's scary. You don't know what to do with this, because students, we all know that students are far more smarter than what we all of us are. And I think that's where, again, coming back to the point of teachers' responsibilities and how they must adapt. We always talk about students thinking out of the box, students relate critical thinking to students' minds, students learning this and that. I think for us as teachers also, we need to now, with AI in education and so many new tools coming up, we should also adapt to this new change, and we can't be just with fixated views and say that whatever I have learned in the past, is something that I'm going to teach, because that's not going to work. And I think when we talk about AI in education, evaluation patterns will need to change. I mean, people are saying ChatGPT is this and that, and we'll ban it, and from the evaluation system. I think it's all about, it's like an open book where, the evaluation, the question paper is much harder than, what it is not otherwise. So when you talk about application-based question papers and so on, so we will as teachers have to adapt to new things that are coming up. And again here, universities, at least abroad, that we saw, and we've established something like that in Symbiosis, is a separate teaching learning resource center where teachers can actually go to the center and look at what are the new things happening in education, look at lessons being given in newer technologies in education. And even otherwise, even if they need some research help and so on. So it's like a center for, like you have a student center, you have this center for teachers where they do find it easy for them because they also don't want to, bother anybody else, but just want to go and learn from someone who knows it better. And we have internal resources, we have external resources. So I'm sure, this is the way it should go. Just one point I would like to add, and I agree with Raj on this, is that very rarely teachers, I mean, nowadays, of course, it's a little difficult to retain the younger lot of teachers, but I would say very rarely teachers shift for salaries. I think it's more for the ecosystem that they're wanting to be in. I mean, we have Professor Gupta here, our Vice Chancellor, who's been with Symbiosis for more number of years than I have been professionally associated, I think 36 years, and so many such examples I can give, simply because you create an ecosystem where the person feels it's his own or her own ecosystem, or a sense of belongingness. So I think universities need to create these kind of ecosystems. Of course, incentives, younger generation needs are different. Like Raj has set up some housing complexes on university campuses and so on. Those things need to add up. But I think the whole culture of an organization is very, very important. And students enjoy that culture as much as what teachers also would enjoy.
Yeah, that's why I've realized that many ambassadors, I think at least I met one of them in Delhi recently. They live on your campus, they teach on your campus, who've served in the Indian Foreign Service. There are many others. In fact, I'll share an anecdote. I recently read 4 books by an author. He's a medical doctor called Atul Gawande. He wrote 4 books, Being Mortal, Better, Checklist, and Complications. After that, Warren Buffett funded him for a geriatric care venture for old people, which he had very interesting thoughts on the subject. Why I say this is that societies and what they do give you an indication on why societies become who and what they become, and then it reflects in every fora. If a book writer who's a doctor can get funded because some investor liked his book, it says a lot about that society. This is about the USA that I'm speaking of. I'll go to Professor Rajkumar for his inputs, because I think we have the last 10 minutes, so we'll take concluding comments.
Well, thank you so much, Tarun. I think the point you mentioned about Atul Gawande and his work, I do believe that unlike many developed societies, we have not been able to cultivate a greater degree of respect for intellectual traditions. There is a undercurrent of anti-intellectualism that has unfortunately creeped into our society for a very long time, and that explains quite significantly why we have not had a very strong and robust presence of intellectuals in the wider public discourse, barring one field, and I will make that as a notable exception, which is the field of economics. If you see, for example, from Arvind Panagiriya to Kaushik Basu to Raghuram Rajan, and there are many more, economics is the only discipline which has had, and of course Dr. Manmohan Singh himself, where professors, academics have been able to integrate into the wider policy making public discourse. Other than that, all others are in the margins, scientists to some extent. But I want to make a larger point which you raised, which is about the fact that how do we build a society whereby the extraordinary contribution of academics can be brought into the mainstream. Now, Dr. Patwardhan mentioned about the unfortunate dynamics surrounding STEM versus the rest, or humanities versus STEM. It's so critical to recognize that artificial intelligence or robotics or machine learning, or for that matter our choices that we make to build a bomb or other things, the scientific knowledge will enable us to make the choice as to how we can build it, but the study of humanities and social sciences will only help us ask a question whether we need that bomb in the first place. That ability to think critically and to challenge and establish norms and to speak truth to power, all of which are so critical in any democratic society, and that is why universities ought to remain as bastions of freedom and knowledge and independent thinking. This also has a direct bearing on governmental policy and funding, because if you don't fund especially public institutions adequately, you are slowly losing out the ability of these institutions to provide independent thought processes, which unfortunately does not get generated out of government and its own machinery.
Point very well taken, because you mentioned Kaushik Basu. Professor Kaushik Basu, we were huddled together in a small room, I think this is about 12, 13 years ago. He said, he asked all of us a question. He said that if you take a taxi, when you get down, your instinct is to pay the driver or run away. So we were all shocked. What kind of question is this for an academic lecture, that we take a taxi and you run? So I said, no, we all pay the money. They say, this is an unspoken contract. Whenever you enter a taxi, you ought to pay. Then why in India, when we enter into a contract, we walk away from the commitment made in the contract? In this country, I see many times in the power sector, committed contracts with the government for the rate of power at which the PPAs are signed, the government walks back on. State governments walk back on. And India has a problem for enforcement of contracts. That was he was getting at. And as an economist, he shared something with us that these are indicators of society. If you improve on these parameters, you improve on every parameter, including academia, because a society in which enforcement of contracts is a problem, a lot of other things are a problem. I'll go to Ben for his closing comment.
Thank you. I mean, one thing I'd say, you look at a lot of what's being talked about at the moment, you're not going to be replaced by AI. You're going to be replaced by a person using AI. And I'd like to wrap up by just talking a little bit about the power of purpose, because I think that's at the heart of a lot of what we're talking about here. Many academics, many teachers, many of them that have been in the profession for many years, they've forgotten a little bit why they got started, what their original purpose was. And as a result, the quality of what they offer to their students is not what it once was, is not what it could be, is not what it needs to be. But the power of purpose drives us all. At QS, our purpose is to enable motivated people around the world to fulfill their potential. I've yet to meet a university leader who doesn't share in that purpose in some fashion. That's what this is all about. We saw some fantastic young people on stage just before this panel who inspired everyone by the clarity of purpose that they have developed. A lot of research suggests that purpose is much more profoundly felt as a driver, as a known driver of Gen Z than it was in earlier generations. Previous generations, they turn out of university and, maybe to a large extent, many of them just do what their parents expected of them. Today, no. They want to understand their why. And they want their teachers and their institutions to help them find it. And those that adapt to being able to help young people find their purpose, to find their why, those are the institutions that are going to be the elite institutions in the future. And those who continue to confound their purpose, continue to find their purpose elusive or forgotten to the mists of history, those are the ones that are going to degrade and be left behind. And I predict that here in India, fast forward 20 years, it's not going to necessarily be the institutions you expect at the top. It's not going to be the institutions that you expect that have found that ability to connect to the purpose of young people and lead us into the future. It's going to be a fascinating, exciting, and remarkable 2 decades for Indian higher education, and we are here to help in any way we can.
In fact, because you said young people with a purpose, I can say that a lot many students from Jindal Global Law School, which Professor Kumar, in a sense, steers, they write for my column on a weekly basis. In fact, many students from Symbiosis in Noida and even Pune, ILS and other institutes, they write for me. They write to me that please publish this article. I've published many of them. I ask them why you want to get published. They come up with the answer that we want to get educated abroad, and to get admitted abroad, they often ask you about how many articles you've authored. So we want to complete that so that, we are published authors. And I happily help them. So I see that yearning that, okay, I should be published, I should be regarded, and I enjoy doing it mentoring. I'll take this to Professor Bhushan Patwardhan for his closing comment.
I think we had a great discussion. For Resilient India, I feel National Education Policy 2020 has given us a wonderful opportunity without waiting when it will be formally really be approved, There are several things which we can start doing at the university level. Many universities have already started doing that. I think that is the crux of it for getting our education system back on track based on our own ethos, our own knowledge. For instance, 14 types of different vidya or different types of knowledges have been explained, 64 different kalas or skills. So they used to go together, what Nalanda Takshashila people talk about. We have lost somehow all that, because of several reasons. We have to regain that for getting into resilient India, and we have to come out of that kind of a mindset, Ben is there, but still I would like to use that. That is a colonial mindset. Still our people are continuing to do that. We have started believing that knowledge of English is equivalent to good knowledge, means English is important. English is international global language. But if somebody is not able to speak good English, doesn't mean he doesn't have knowledge. So this knowledge, getting access to knowledge in our own mother tongue is going to be very crucial. Even today, when I read Marathi newspaper, I am Marathi, I understand it better, and that is everybody. So these kinds of changes, if we are able to bring in, and I know that many Indian universities are already doing it, we are on the good trajectory. I'm sure it will happen soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll go to Professor Vidya Revdekar for a closing comment. For the
So as a closing comment, I'd just like to narrate a story. A short story. So there was this very bright Indian boy who studied at Cambridge several decades ago, later became the governor of Maharashtra. So before leaving Cambridge and after completing the course, he went to the rector or the vice chancellor, whoever was his vice chancellor then, and asked for a bona fide certificate or a character certificate, because that during those times, if you had to get an employment, especially in government, if you had to get government jobs in India, you needed your university to give you a bona fide certificate, as they would call it, or a character certificate. So when he went to the rector asked him, why do you require this certificate? So he said, no, because I have to produce this when I go for employment back home in India. So he told him that if you have passed out of Cambridge and you were with us for 3 years, if your personality doesn't depict the character of Cambridge, then what is the certificate really going to be important to you for? And I think it's for us as university leaders to build these characters amongst our young boys and girls to join us, so that they are recognized from a distance, like this young boy who then became the governor of Maharashtra was being recognized. And I think whether it's the future of education or the past, I think the whole character building exercise is what we need to do beyond, of course, skills, employability, entrepreneurship and everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause to this panel. There have been a lot of takeaways. I learned a lot. I'm sure you also had some takeaways upon hearing all these 4 eminent individuals that are part of my panel. I would like to thank each one of you for making time. Professor Rajkumar, Ashwin, who I've been in touch with for the past 2-3 days, for making this panel a success. I enjoyed moderating this session and looking forward for more in the coming years. Thank you so very much, and all you have a good day and a good time in Goa. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.